Hello. I think we're going well. So on this show, I would like to do a video commentary on a ChatGPT commentary on an article that I just posted. So let's just dive right into it. I know I typically start rambling, so we'll see how tight we can keep this. First of all, I wanted to comment on just the form that I'm doing here. And basically self-report, I have some issue with creation. I guess I see myself as having a very intricate theoretical project. It's all about having sort of like pretty intricate ideas and then both expressing them in action, but also using action to call attention, I guess, to the ideas. And we'll get into that, I suppose. But it's obviously really fraught. I'm really interested, in what you could call a planetary state of emergency. And I go for emergency instead of war to signal that I don't really see myself as a warrior or like fighting anybody really in particular. But war is a kind of emergency. So I think you can respond to war in general and, in detail as an emergency. So anyway, you can't get off the hook of it being fraught. Like, do you think I'm a bad person or misguided? And what are the stakes of that being misguided? When we're sitting here talking about artificial intelligence, whatever, right? The stakes are very high, and artificial intelligence is a good example for that because it is the place where we have our intentions, and that's where I would be saying we're all doing theory there. As Ben Swibelson might say, we all have a sort of like a social paradigm or ontology, even if we don't know what the word ontology is. It just exists to say, this is the stuff that you think is real. When you think about things that, I don't know, things that are important that appear. And if you think of them about effects and then what causes those effects, it's like, oh, well, it's culture, it's the nation, it's, military affairs, it's human nature, whatever. Like these are the sorts of things people will call to in a very casual conversation, even if you're not a, I don't know exactly how to say it, but even people who are not, I don't know what you'd say, like in a conventional use of the term theory, right? They are not doing theory or something. Like they're not academic. I don't know exactly how to say it. But at the same time, I would say it's an implicit theory. The same way you could have like a folk. Do we talk about folk theories? Maybe that's the term, but like folk wisdom, that kind of thing. But with AI, right, it's the whole question of, what is your intention? And the issue of alignment is that, you might try to get a computer to do something, but maybe it won't do what you intend. So you face a threat from the tool that you're trying to use. Anyway, not really staying tight. Let's try and get into the article here. So we have 5 theses from Jauntology, Jouse, Ruin Value Derivation. And it says it's from Orange October. So Orange October is a reference that I made up around the time that I went and sat outside the transformation and training command. Orange is a color that I've incorporated into my expression, I guess, for a few years now. And you'll notice that I have to go to a new link, but in the previous, and also the Jauntology Jouse, I keep reusing this image because I really like this image, so I just want to keep using it. I feel like I need to explain it more. So that's why, like, at the end of this article, I say something about, like, I'm going to ramble later. I almost was like, I need to ramble more about these concepts. But that is sort of more a specific instantiation of what I'm talking about in general here, that we'll get into in the ChatGPT summary, I believe. So it's sort of like a meta theory. I don't know. And then what was I trying to say about this? Oh yeah, that this person supposed to look like Grimes, has orange hair, and there's also orange paint on these paintings of words. And so yeah, that's by design. Orange, just an interesting color. And so calling the October orange, for me, is playing into this theme of the two words that have the same letter. So it's like OO, the same way Jauntology Jouse is JJ. Of course, it's built off of Hauntology House, which is HH, which is a very notable double letter. So let's see here. Let's just dive into it. So the first thesis that it drew out of what I wrote was, artificial intelligence as theoretical violence and meta-reflexive shock. So the proliferation of AI-generated images and videos constitutes a form of theoretical violence, a radical expansion of semiotic juxtaposition beyond the textual into the hypervisual, which destabilizes the ontological boundaries of likeness, authorship, and self-representation. This new mode of mediation inflicts an irreversible transformation on human self-understanding and the social imaginary. So, like, the first thing that I would want to say is that I wouldn't use the word human in this way. Like, that to use the word human in that way, I think takes for granted this category of the human in a way that I would never really want to do. That's sort of what I'm talking about is operating on this fractal level where I'm trying to talk about the theory of why, but in this particular instance, it is a specific case where it's like, I'm trying to dislodge our familiar conceptions of the human and also call to mind like, the other issues that arise from contemplating the concept of human as a concept, as opposed to just taking it for granted and sort of what you could say abstracting over. Because, here we have human self-understanding as a composite term, which is, we could just as easily, right, go and undermine or question the term self-understanding. And this has everything to do with theoretical violence. So the issue is, in a way, while you're trying to discuss theoretical violence, you are, maybe you'd say you're called, but you're practicing theoretical violence at the same time. So the issue is you're doing violence to your own terminology. So as soon as you try to put something in a certain way, it's incumbent upon you to start to anticipate basically the misconceptions and like dogmatic inferences that could be made based on what you said, related to all the different terms that you abstract over and them in combination. So anyways, yes, I also was mentioning in the article that got summarized here, the Jauntology Jouse article, that I feel like the AI image and video generation is allowing the sort of infinite variety and conceptual juxtaposition that language offers. And it's extending that to, again, the audiovisual field. So, I can tell a story, right, where there's, a famous character interacting with a historical figure doing a specific thing. I'm trying to like be general. And so like when we're just using words in our imaginations, like we can talk about anything. We can make a story where anything happens, but it's much harder to do that in drawing or in video, images, moving images, and sounds. So we have like computer generated imagery, but of course, that has, you'd call it like a barrier to entry, or people would say there are high capital requirements. It takes a lot to be able to have the technology to be able to do that. So not everybody would be able to make, a video, because it would come down to what sorts of ideas for videos or whatever for that sort of content was approved by whoever had the leverage to make the choice. And also just the fact that if there's a limited, and this, it's not that it's truly unlimited now, but the constraint on the bottleneck, there's just not that much content which is produced, and so that's a limitation on what gets made as well. So now there's more which is going on, and you can juxtapose anything. So that's part of what I think is so trippy about, okay, so we'll keep going on here. Wadley identifies, that's me by the way, identifies AI imagery as a kind of psychedelic condition, not merely making things worse, but making them weirder. The weirdness is structural, a total saturation of symbolic production that mirrors what Jean Baudrillard called the violence of the sign. Simulacra and simulation, the violence of the image. I don't think that's a real reference. The quote-unquote meta-reflexive character of AI image synthesis is key. Each generated image is both representation and commentary on representation. It hits different because the visual mode intensifies semiotic reflexivity that once belonged only to language. So that's what I think it's trying to get at. I don't know, whatever. This is obviously like it's automatic writing. It doesn't know what it's doing or something. But anyways, this idea of the semiotic reflexity, this idea that something once belonged only to language. So I'm just talking about the plasticity, I guess you could say, the fact that in theory, there is so much which is ready at hand to us when we are speaking and when we're writing, because we can use words. Like I can just talk about the Panic of 1893 or pseudo Dionysus, or I'm just trying to think of random things, what's like what is it? The pilot wave of David Bohm, theory of quantum analysis, or like the opening scene of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the people are hitting each other with the bones. Those might all be kind of predictable in a certain way, certain genre of what I'm talking about. But that's sort of the idea. You can just sort of fill it in with Mad Libs, or like if you go to Wikipedia, I think you can do like a random article. That might be something that we could do as a demonstration. Do they still have that? I'll try and do it with you. Maybe if I just like search Wikipedia random article, that'll work. Wikipedia. Yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about when it comes to the random article. Like some things seem more or less random. It's like this idea of the exotic, or like what we are familiar with. Is this it? Well, it says Wiki Roulette. Oh dear. Well, I forgot what I was saying. Oh, like some things are more or less strange. So like you could go from something like this, a pipeline, like, and then it could be a sports team that you're familiar with, and you're like, oh, it's interesting. Like I'm just randomly connecting this thing that I think of as being more familiar with this thing that is stranger. Or if you went from this to the reproductive cycle of some strange insect or something, you'd be like, well, that seems even weirder. Now the pipeline seems relatable, kind of thing. It's difficult to describe. It's almost like you have a certain dimensionality or a certain like linearity. It has basically to do with your frame, but instead of thinking, it's like thinking about your worldview as being like a filter that is then like being applied to like the world that you're moving through. But your what you're perceiving would basically be a dimensionally reduced account, I guess you could say. Like you can't factor in all the complexity. So therefore, like it's like you're in this is a good one. It's like you're tuned to a certain scale, being like a piano or something. So like if you're in C, then things make sense to you. But so being conceptually removed from what you're used to would be basically like you're trying to play an F sharp, or I don't know if that's the one that's the furthest away, but whatever. But you're trying to play an F sharp, whereas your worldview or whatever is tuned to C. So that would be corollary to you're thinking in terms of classical concepts. Even the term classical concepts could be indexed to this as a sort of relative problem that everybody faces, in the sense that like we're all stuck in certain ways. I forget what I'm saying. Oh yeah, so like you're tuned in a certain key. Anyways, so let's just go through this. So East-West gas pipeline, Miss Peru 2014. William Winford, one of the most successful English master masons, right? So what I'm talking about in terms of the plasticity of language, and now you have Friends from college, I don't know, a TV show. So the point is, like, using words, like you can connect all those random things. But even if you wanted to make like a cartoon strip out of that, you could have done that before AI. but that takes more work, right, than making the AI image. So the AI image now enables this like juxtaposition, and that in a formal way, that is itself part of what makes it trippy. So if you see somebody that you recognize doing something that they wouldn't normally do, so that it seems strange, it's not just the specific instance of that person doing something strange, which is weird, but this juxtaposition in general. Yeah. So maybe next time I'll have like content of it to look at, to show you. And so otherwise, yeah, the whole idea of like things getting weirder, that is a big aspect for me. In terms of thinking even just about, are you pessimistic or something? It's like even pessimism or despair or guilt or whatever. It's like, it's, yeah, in a sense, it's too optimistic because it's assuming that there's like something which can stay the way it is, but it's actually all mutating. And we're going through mutations faster and faster. And so again, we can have a negative anticipation of this, but it's like, but there's bad people who are, influencing the process so that, it's like we're becoming mutants and it's like a cancer or whatever. But the alternative to that, basically, it cannot be that we're going to stay the way we are, or we're going to go back, or we are going to apply these like classical Newtonian style concepts like the free world and human rights and democracy and even the nation, right? So it's not even just that it's like, oh, the highfalutin whatever. I'm saying even the kinds of terms that would ground, the hardcore nationalism, the intense sort of militarist, whatever, like those constituent concepts, like the chain of command, right, is coming into question. In addition to, the things like human rights and whatever. Anyways, so I basically think this AI imagery stuff is a place where you see that enacted, and the stuff like the frog protester and these sorts of like absurd things, and also engagements with high theology. We're talking about the Antichrist and things of this nature. It's like it's showing that something is molting out of our concepts. Maybe a way to put it would be that usually, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but maybe a way to put it would be that usually people are saying that, they have a preferred concept. So Antichrist implies, that you favor, this Christian eschatology narrative where you're basically investing symbolically the term of the Antichrist with the symbolic charge of all creation or whatever, because that's the term that you're choosing to basically try to act like it is the fulcrum, right, of the lever that you're using to move the world, because it's sort of like your concept that you're taking for granted. I don't know that much about Lacan, but you could talk about like, the master signifier here. It's like you're projecting all of the incoherence. And it's also related to ontological terror and Afro-pessimism, because in that, you could basically say that for those people, like Calvin Warren or Frank Wilderson, it's like the master signifier is blackness or anti-blackness, which is like a negative because it's standing in for nothingness. Anyways, but so whereas, I think some people would basically try, it's like you're trying to hold on because similarly you could say something like, oh, well, we need to protect democracy, right? Or like we need to resist fascism. Fascism is very similar to the Antichrist in being this like figure of like big negativity, right? And so basically, like you're investing it with all this charge, which has a lot of pathos to it, because all the different emotions. Like if I feel afraid about how technology is going to be applied, like I could lean into this idea of like, oh yes, that's because fascists are going to do something with technology. And so the broader question of what's going to happen with technology becomes funneled into the fascism. So like the one term that is kept stable, is going to absorb all of the sort of symbolic energy and try and pretend like you're containing the, I want to say incoherence. It's that's not really it. You could also say indeterminate character, ineffability, or something like this. I forgot where I was going with that. But overall, I think that it's still a form of bargaining. So, like, I'm also thinking of Ben Zweibels and talking about the free world. This is another version of this where it's like we really should understand that, things are more complicated than this, right? It's more complicated than Jesus and the Antichrist. It's more complicated than, the free world versus authoritarian. But at the same time, it's part of the emergency, right? That we're stuck in what seems like a war, and more generally, we have these norms that apply to us. We're going to face a cost if we acknowledge complexity, because uh, as long as there seems to be some like molar confrontation, like if people perceive it to be like, oh, it's America versus China, then it's like whichever side that you're on, and you try to say, oh, well, it's more complicated than that. Like people will assume that you're on the other side because now you're undermining, so everything can be filtered into, this friend enemy. If you're not with us, you're against us type of thing. And so that's an important feature of design, but I'm getting away from myself here. So in this frame, AI systems act as semiotic accelerants, devices that enact what Byung-Chul Han calls the positivity of transparency. I don't know anything about this. Annihilating the negative space in which meaning once gestated. Wadley interprets this not as degradation, but mutation, the expansion of logical type from representation to self-referential commentary embedded within the medium itself. This creates a double violence. 1, the sensory excess of image over text, and 2, the involuntary exposure of the self to synthetic reconfiguration, the change of one's relationship to one's image without consent. So this is based on a particular part of the article I published where I was talking about like how destabilizing it is to basically have deep fakes made of you. Although deep fake is maybe too specific of a term because I associate that with something where people are actually trying to convince people that you did something. Whereas I also think it's basically like you can use somebody's likeness and now they're a character. And so now it is very much like, different people's likenesses and their image, just because they're famous, becomes a found object for other people. And so like I've done this with with other so I mean, yeah, the point is like here I am using Grimes's likeness, the person called Grimes, right? But I also have different ones. I mean, this is not an artificial image, but this just goes to show the I don't know, the earlier one, where it's like, well, you're famous, somebody took a picture of you and now I can use this picture as like my article. And maybe if I made a bunch of money, I could be sued over this, but I'm not. So I'm not. Or here again, these are the, what do we call it? The X-Files people. So obviously, like in a large part, it's either like if there are certain things, if you want to do them, you have to accept that your image is going to be out there as a cost. Or like there are certain things where if you want to do them, like that is the means, right? Like these people staged a protest and they became visible. And here's another one of, the person known as Greta Thunberg and everything. And so I actually think there's something admirable about that. Part of what this article is about is that I think the ideas behind like what these people are doing, like just stop oil or, whatever, like they're not complex enough. But still, I think it's similar to a soldier who's like fighting in a war that I don't believe in or something. You can still sort of appreciate the bravery, I suppose. And when it comes to people who are more like activists doing performance art, I think it's easier not even to have like critical support, but it feels, even if like I disagree and like, because, Peter Thiel thinks, Greta Thunberg could be like the Antichrist. So like people could have very negative conceptions of these people. But I at least think, if you're not hurting anybody, anyways, it's easier to sort of appreciate like that courage in addition to, you're applying creativity to the situation. Anyway, we'll go back over here. So yeah, when it comes to AI images, like people are having, what am I trying to say? People are having images made of them. And so it's like you're losing control over your image. And so for most people, you would not really understand what that means. But it will come to a point where everything is so saturated that there are, deep fake or whatever. There are these sorts of videos about everyone. And so, but that's still happening, basically. So theoretical violence here describes a new asymmetry of perception. Reality is not distributed evenly. Those whose images are algorithmically reprocessed experience a higher logical type, a new phenomenology of alienation analogous to what Baudrillard termed the ecstasy of communication. I wouldn't really put it this way. It's not really alienation. It's more, I guess you could consider it, it's more like ecstasy than alienation. Because it's not so much that you're deprived of like an authentic experience or something, like you're losing the private life or something. It's like the private life was never really there. And what you have to grapple with is like your own nature, I suppose, as it's being revealed. And yeah, because you can compare, your experience to some fantasy of like what it ideally should be based off of some categories that you like to imagine apply or should apply, whatever that means. But in reality, it's just like it is what it is. And it is what it is. It doesn't mean just because you think, or what I'm trying to say, just because you're not what you think you should be, doesn't mean you're all bad. It's also sort of like, something sublime is coming through you, which is sort of the worst and the best. But yeah, in terms of reality not distributed evenly, like it comes into play of like, do you understand the implications of what's going on? And in a way, it's sort of the folk wisdom of, it's not real to you. It's not real to you until it happens to you. And so oftentimes people talk about that concept in a very dismissive way. It's like, oh, you're against abortion, but then like you're pregnant and you make yourself into a special case. Or things like that, where it's like you say that you're against something, but when it applies to you, or like you say climate change isn't real, but then like your beachfront property floods, and you want the, whatever it is, or you hate socialism, but then you want the bailout or whatever. Forgot where I was going with that. Reality not distributed. Yeah, so when it happens to you. So lots of times people use this right in the bickering mode. It's like once you start to see that it's like people are just trying to like find a scapegoat and like attack somebody's character and everything, it's like those kinds of statements are really not that interesting. I guess I make them as well, but like that's where you can read me against myself because there's anyways. Trying to say, but basically it's it's understandable that people react differently when they feel like something applies to them. So instead of just getting mad at people about that and trying to like hector them into like taking something seriously, whatever that means, by making it their problem in this meta way, like you can basically try instead to influence people's perception of what is affecting them, which I guess is it's obvious. But doing that in creative ways through this sort of performance art is basically what I'm talking about. It's like you're doing an operation to provide more data. And so you are trying to surprise people and get them to reflect on what you did. Anyways, so here there's actually something from the article prompt that's funny. Supplementary references. And now we have section 2, performance art, iteration, and the inflation of the symbolic. Thesis, performance acts within mass media ecosystems, such as the frog protester phenomenon. Performance acts within mass media ecosystems, such as the frog protester phenomenon, demonstrate how political communication has mutated into iterative symbolic warfare. The proliferation of memes, gestures, and performative personae constitutes a one-to-infinity logic of aesthetic reproduction, displacing traditional political discourse with recursive theater. So I would not use the term warfare. I think ChatGPT just loves to say that I believe in like insurgency or something. Anyway, but you do use the term blitzkrieg in one of the concepts that I would like to describe at a certain point, have gone into a little bit. So, I mean, it is important to grapple with. But so instead of symbolic warfare, I would say it's more like it's call and response, right? It's challenge and response. It's like it's much more, it's like you're trying to come up with, again, I just love the term response. You're trying to like craft operations, or you're trying to craft behaviors which are appropriate to the situation that you're in. And so that is, it involves, what we're saying here is symbolic, because, you know, even the most pragmatic problems that we have, you know, involve people, and people ultimately have a much more sort of nonlinear mythical appreciation of the world than we really express in these classical sorts of concepts. So anyway, we'll keep going. Wadley's frog case study reframes protest as design operation, a feedback system between symbolic gesture and mass attention. The frog protester is not a political actor, but an operator in the symbolic battle space. The power of such performance lies not in its message, but in its capacity to shift the discourse timeline. An insight resonant with Ben Swibelson's theory of phantasmal war, where perception management supplants material engagement. Again, expressed in pretty simplistic terms. But yeah, so what I'm saying is something like the frog protester is very striking. So it does a good job of creating what I would call like a concept handle. The same way, like if you create a catchy term for something, that can help it become a familiar concept. Like I'm thinking of things that Seinfeld popularized, like shrinkage or something. You know, shrinkage, if that's a funny term, you know, it helps there be more awareness of what it describes, because the term itself is like going around. Anyway, but what I'm saying is, you know, the frog protester thing is like kind of interesting, because it is it obviously succeeds in being a striking thing that people are doing. But what I'm saying, in that sense, it's a very clickable concept handle, but like what it's actually taking you to, in my opinion, is not that interesting. You know, the whole idea of like, oh, we need to treat people like human beings, and, you know, we need to follow the law and due process and so forth. Like for me, that's a very linear Newtonian, Euclidean, I guess you could say modernist. I don't know, but I'm not trying to be like, I think, you know, what you could say, whatever is called modernity, maybe I'd even dispute that is real. I'm not against it. It's just that it's delivering us to this point where, you know, it really is not enough to just say these platitudes like, you know, democracy and human rights and free world, even to like the level of the nation, or what else would be against modernity, you know, like the ethnicity, the religion, or whatever. You know, to make any of these sort of like the fixed point is to be playing a different version of a lesser game, I guess. Anyways, so yeah, I think the frog protester thing is interesting. But what I'm looking for, and also trying to do, you know, because I've also been doing, I mean, you could say that basically what I did was not interesting enough, but, you know, baby steps. So basically, like, a striking thing happened, but it's not interesting enough. But I see the potential where, you know, you do something that catches attention, but you connect it to theory, right? You connect it to philosophy or whatever. So then, like, when people hear about it, they're like, oh, why did that person do that? You know, like, we're like, what happened? Like, you did what? Right? But it's not like something awful, right? It's not like, oh, like people died or whatever. It's like, oh, like something, yeah. I mean, I don't even really want to advocate it. Like, well, put it this way, in terms of artistic efficiency, or what's the, like, an exquisite, elegant, right? In terms of elegance, it's better don't even break the law, right? Just do something which is confusing and striking, right? So that itself is a point of design. It's also actually very similar to a joke, because the whole thing with a joke is, you could call it like subverting expectations. So that means it's at least sort of this thing in tension, where it's like you're playing within a set of expectations, or basically a conceptual domain, or, you know, you have to express yourself in certain words, but then like the whole point of what you're doing is to sort of like make it absurd. It's also similar to poetry as described by Percy Shelley, where it's like you're making the familiar not familiar. So that's exactly what the frog protester is doing, right? It's like, oh, it's like this, oh, there's the military police and all this, and it's like, oh, there's a frog. Like, that's incongruous, right? It doesn't fit. And that's the whole point, is it's supposed to make you think differently about the entire situation. But in terms of like what is helpful, like what is that channeling your thoughts into? If it's just like, oh, like, yeah, of course the government's bad or whatever, like that's not complex enough, like to really help there be a solution. Anyways, or like dissolution, if you will. And then I iterate on Ben Zweibelson's idea of phantasmal war to call it phantasmal emergency. So it's really not a war in the sense of like there's real enemies, but you could say there's an emergency that people think that they have enemies. So the response to this war is not necessarily to, you could call it neutralize, but you really don't, or not even really neutralize, because even meaning it in a non-mortal or non-deadly sense, it's not like you're trying to completely frustrate what somebody's doing. It's more like you're trying to show them a better way to get what they want, or transform what they want, or help them transform what they want in collaboration with other people transforming what they want. So that basically, like, you're shifting to a situation where that no longer has the hallmarks of what we call war. But it might have other emergencies. So I think that's actually a really underexplored thing. Like, let's say we're shifting into an art mode where instead of being concerned about war, like we're concerned about art and conceptual territory. So like you could make in the future, like you could have it be like for your generative intelligence or whatever, like you can't use pictures of the American flag to make your art because the United States of America or whatever like has a private control over the picture of the American flag, and also down to the point of totalitarianism, right, where like you can go into all physical space and withdraw, like destroy those pictures. I forget where I was going with that, but it's a phantasmal emergency. Anyways, the frog event's transformation from singular act to meme to costume economy illustrates what Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 describes as the discontinuity between origination and scaling. The fooming of the image is not causal but viral, mirroring Baudrillard's description of Warhol's serial reproduction as the vanishing point of art. Signifiers replicating themselves until they cancel their reference. I think this last part is basically just very superficial, like Baudrillard language. Like I don't even really know what the point of that is. But the relationship to 0 to 1 is basically the idea that Peter Thiel is talking about, like, the importance of creating the initial kernel of an idea for a business versus scaling that idea. So I'm thinking about the movie The Founder, I want to say, which is about McDonald's. So it's like that movie is actually all about how there is an art to scaling as well, but it also involves, right, the crucial appropriation of the initial thing. So basically there's the first restaurant of McDonald's, and then there's iterating on that plan and building basically the same building in different places, and then everything that goes along with that in real estate and so forth. But so having that first idea, like being the first one to do something, like, or there being that confluence, is very important. So that's like the frog person in the costume of the frog costume, right? The protester. So what I'm saying is, like, for me, it's really funny because that already feels extremely played out. Like I'm already extremely bored with the costumes, but at the same time, I also know it's inevitable that something else is going to happen. Like there could actually be, a moment of violence that involves somebody in a costume, right? And it could totally be a shift where it's like, for a lot of people, right, it's not that, oh, it's so absurd, right? The person in the costume is not dangerous, but rather like, oh, the person in the costume can be dangerous, or at least that's what the story is, and so like it is like that costume in itself. I don't know. You could say it's a sort of way of taking the aesthetic initiative, right? It is a sort of gesture. It's an important play, but there have to be more plays, which is not just like making the same play over and over again. So it's similar to throwing the paint on the Van Gogh or throwing the paint on something. It's like that's a really good idea to have the first time, but then there's limited returns in doing it again and again. It is similar. What I'm talking about in terms of Baudrillard and Warhol is that Baudrillard's saying that Warhol basically did two very similar things in the 60s and the 80s. And so in the 60s, it was much more revolutionary or something. And in the 80s, it was much less so. Because it's like at a certain point, you're pushing the envelope and otherwise you're just repeating. And that's really like the problem or whatever that we have in general is that we're just repeating poetic forms because we're not coming up with better ones. So what I'm worried about here is that, you know, there's not enough conceptual meat on the bones. Like there's not enough to follow up on and to transform people when it comes to this performance. On the other hand, I feel like the nonlinear, the Eldritch, the non-Newtonian, the non-Euclidean, it's sort of oozing out through all of this. And so there is constant pressure on classical concepts. And so, yeah, I guess part of what I'm saying is like, it's better to have a controlled demolition than uncontrolled demolition. And so like, if I seem like I'm causing disruption, it's like I foresee greater disruption because these classical concepts are not adequate to our situation, and keeping a lot of people thinking just in terms of those classical concepts and not challenging it. Yeah, it makes us very brittle. It makes us so we can't change. We can't adjust our expectations to things that might be good, but we won't accept them because they don't line up with our metrics that we set. Anyways, so this iterative inflation, 1 to infinity, reveals the exhaustion of symbolic novelty. The frog becomes a genre, and its moral valence, irony, innocence, absurdity is contingent. Wadley extrapolates this towards speculative futures in which the costume logic flips, costumed protesters as symbols of innocence becoming read as potential threats, demonstrating that every semiotic structure contains its own inversion. Yeah, so basically, like, we're threatened with like a regime where, yeah, there's a total policing. Like when I was outside the place doing my performance, the person said, like, what you're doing is not normal, but there's no law against that. And I almost wanted to say, like, not yet or something like that, not yet anyway, because you can see here that it's similar to things Baudrillard talks about, where like an infinitely powerful system is also infinitely fragile. And it's not just because it's like, oh, you're insecure, you can't handle seeing a frog. But if we get to the point where it's like, oh yeah, like the inflatable thing, it's somehow associated with violence, I'm just anticipating that, you know, something's going to happen. Then it's like, yeah, like wearing a, you know, it will be illegal, right? It will not be allowed to wear costumes, right? And that's the sort of like semiotic totalitarianism that we are trending toward. And it's not just because like, oh, people are thin-skinned or have snowflakes. It's like there are deep structural problems in terms of like the issue of people having different sorts of mass fantasies, and the fact that like those fantasies imply expectations that seemingly can't all be met at the same time. That's why it's really important to have self-disruption and try and change people's expectations, especially concrete expectations, which is to say, like, you could have an expectation like, I want to have enough to eat, or like, I don't want to starve to death. But then how that expectation is met, you could have a sort of meta expectation about that. Anyways. Oh, right. And then where the inducing self-disruption comes in is to like have more respect for people's agency and freedom, not just in this way where it's like, I'm going to be so nice, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's also that we want their wisdom, right? We're trying to milk people for like what they have to contribute, which we can only get out of people really, like, I don't know. It's basically by observing them. It can, yeah. But, you know, if people are more in a sort of uncoerced, if people are more artistically free, there's a different quality to, you know, what we get from them. So, yeah. Structure. So, yeah, just the 1 to infinity. What I'm trying to say here is that, like, it's already super boring with, like, the costumes, where it's like, okay, now we have people giving away costumes and all this. It's like, okay, we get it. Like, you found the one button and now you're hitting the button a million times. But it's also in a way because you're trying to avoid doing theory, right? You don't really want to think. You don't want to challenge your concepts. Whereas theoretical violence, in my opinion, is all about questioning the terms of a phrase. It's funny because Jordan Peterson is getting clowned for this right now. about like, what does this mean? What does that mean? What does this mean? And it's like people clowning on him, on that person for that, like that in a way is the problem. You know, people want to be like, oh, haha, you don't know the difference between so and so and so and so. It's like that is your like defensive reaction where you're like, yeah, treating people badly or something. Anyway, because you are afraid to take what they're saying to heart and really question like your own terms. But the whole thing about our moment is that these things are the friction, which is grinding these things to pieces, is happening like before our eyes. Anyway, we'll keep going. The collapse of classical concepts and the drift beyond the human. Terms like human law, democracy, and free world are legacy concepts, residual semantic anchors of a collapsing paradigm. Their continued invocation functions as cognitive nostalgia, unable to account for the transformational conditions of the present. The emergent task is to think beyond these categories into the domain of the transnormal. Yeah, so I came up with transnormal because it's not even so much like, oh, we have to not be normal, like you're taking the idea of normality for granted. Transnormal goes along with another term that I've cooked up called transconceptual, which is a different way of describing, you could call it a poetic or non-representational approach to language, also Dhamma language. But yeah, transconceptual because it's not that you're being non-conceptual because you're advancing concepts, but what exactly it is you're advancing is not captured in any of the concepts. And so this like continual movement of trying to, you know, destabilize any term which seems like it's becoming too rigidly understood, or which is like capturing too many unhelpful connotations, that's where you have to like jump in. Yeah, but at the same time, there is some sort of consistency. There's some sort of like necessity to what is coming out. But it's what am I trying to say? It's connected to something that I think about where it's like, you know, I could be sitting here wielding a concept or something, but it doesn't have the same implication that that's the only way, that's the only proper way to do it, right? So it's sort of like I'm creating fan fiction and I have Samara Morgan from The Ring in my fan fiction. And so, coming out of the screen, right? But just because I put a character into my story doesn't mean that, what are you trying to say? That's the only way to tell the story. Like you can use the same character for your story. And so, I don't know, it's just interesting, which would be a different, and when it comes to concepts would be basically being to say that when it comes to, for example, Christianity, which we're going to get to because the Antichrist is going to slot in here. You know, instead of just saying like, oh, you know, people are getting carried away with Christianity, there's a problem with people being too Christian and religious and so on. It's instead of that to have your own version of Christianity, the way that you would interpret it. And so, you know, you are putting forward, you're not just dismissing what other people are doing, you're taking up, you're basically trying to say that when we all do things, we are like artists and we have found materials and then we cobble those things together and advance our own position. So if somebody is advancing their Christianity or something, or there's like broad movement, right, of all these people, you know, you'd basically be saying like, I'm also an artist. I also am finding the same materials you are, namely Christianity or, you know, freedom or whatever, like different concepts. I am also an inheritor to what you claim to be, you know, the heir of. I'm also an heir. And so like, and I have my own claims or whatever. But at the same time, you can try and do that in a, I'm going to say a different way. You know, you can try and do that in a way which like is also allowing other people to have their own interpretation. It's just that you are not going to be deterred from making your own intervention based on your interpretation. So basically, you can be not claiming to instantiate a norm, as opposed to other people who basically claim that in what they do, whether overtly or implicitly. Oh, and I also should have, law is kind of in here, but I should have more like sort of right wing. These it sounds more like I'm just poo-pooing like mushy, like liberal quote unquote concepts or something, or leftist concepts a little bit. This is not really leftist. This is more like liberal, I guess. But like the thing is, like terms like nation are included, or class, or labor. But yes, I think I should especially hammer home the right-wing ones, like race or culture, civilization, right? Like these words like are not helping. Like, and getting too stuck on them is it's all very similar to me. So like I see great similarity between, a figure like Greta Thunberg or Peter Thiel or so many people who advance whatever concept, because it's like whatever you're advancing it in this simple way, basically in this normative way. And what that means is like everything I'm always talking about. So let's go on. Exposition. Wadley explicitly rejects the moralized universalism of humanist discourse. Invocation of human rights, rule of law, or democracy are treated as classical concepts in Carl Schmitt's sense, conceptual relics from a prior cosmology now operationally inert. The proliferation of such terms in activist or military rhetoric, whether from Greta Thunberg, Ben Zweibelson, Chaos, that means Grimes, or Peter Thiel, betrays a reliance on symbolic coordinates that no longer orient meaning. I don't remember exactly where it was. It's probably in the Theory of the Partisan. I think that's an under-mentioned text by Carl Schmitt, by the way, right now. People are all about the friend-enemy distinction and now the constitutional dictatorship or something, now that whatever's happening in the U.S. But the Partisan, the Theory of the Partisan, I think is pretty interesting. Anyway, the classical concept comes up there, and I'm not sure exactly what Carl Schmitt means by it, but I do think it just means like sort of a naive approach to concepts where it's like, oh yeah, the state, we know what the state is. But instead of that, like you can really question it, and you can be like, maybe there's only ever, irregular networks of partisans, and like they can project the idea of a state. And then that idea of a state can in turn be very important, but like that doesn't mean that the state obtains on a first order basis. I'm not sure if Carl Schmitt really says something like that, but it's implied because like what a state is has something to do with the law. But the whole point of Carl Schmitt is that like the law cannot contain, it's not like an instruction set for all possible eventualities. So if you describe the law or the Constitution as sort of like an objective function, in the sense that the collective sense making, whatever, the decision making thing is sort of like a machine, and you have the machinery of the law, which like passes these things. Basically, it's not. Yeah, it's a rule set which is always changing, and so what's more important than the actual carrying through of the supposed rule of law is the idea of the rule of law. So the idea of the rule of law is important because the law is a big time deterrence effect. Like there's the impression that people would do more, there would be chaos, right, if people didn't believe in the law. But that's different than thinking that the law really exists. But that's the kind of thing where I can see Ben Zweibelson, for example, is caught in a huge double bind, because they're sort of trying to communicate about complexity and things of this nature. But on the other hand, they have to speak in this very binary Newtonian way about, like we're doing this, we're on the good side, and the nation, and the West and the free world and everything. Like these sorts of concepts don't hold up, right, within the intellectual or conceptual sphere, I think, of systemic operational design even. But I have that same problem with Greta Thunberg or even the Afro-pessimists, and certainly, like a Peter Thiel. But what I'm trying to say is like, I criticize like a lot of different people sort of along similar lines, sort of with wishing them the best, right? But it's like we all need to self-disrupt, I guess you could say in different ways, and this applies to me as well, but like based on like our over attachment to old concepts, and also like you could call it like our enslavement to like the expectations of others, because we have this idea of like, oh well, change can only happen so fast, like there's a limiting factor of what people will accept. So what I'm advocating for is not to abide by that, basically not to take no for an answer. Like people are going to have to change, and we're going to be catalysts. And it has to be this sort of meta-conceptual change where it's not just, oh, we need to serve the nation better, or like we need to do class struggle better, but it's like we need to rethink the nation. We need to rethink the whole conception of class or, race or whatever, like our most sacred cows are, like they really have to be interrogated and likely slaughtered. But so yeah, that's the sort of tension with Ben Zweibelson, because Ben Zweibelson will be like, here I am, I'm going to be provocative, I'm going to raise a ruckus. And then it's like, yeah, the whole idea of the free world is one of the like biggest sacred cows there is, which is not, of course, to advocate like, the people who talk about the free world, like they're hypocrites and they're bad. Like it's not, or to call out the hypocrisy or something like that. It's not like that at all, because everybody is hypocritical in the same way. It's like exceedingly obvious, but still it's a retardation, right? It is a slag. It is an impediment to. It is an albatross hung around the neck of, true cognitive operativity, right? Or systemic operational design inquiry. And so I advocate basically for a democratization of that. That's similar, to get off on a little bit of a tangent, that's similar for me to the democratization of Nietzsche, which is basically just the idea that, if you're going to be a great person, like fundamentally what you want to do is you want to make good company, right? So it's not about like, oh, you're going to be so awesome and you're going to have everything and whatever. It's like the person who is the best is the person who like helps cultivate other people to be good company. So like in a sense, what makes you so good is like what you do that facilitates things for other people. An example is Napoleon and the Code of Napoleon, which of course not only Napoleon wrote, but of course that's like a law. But so like I'm saying the Napoleonic Code of Law is like performance art. It's not really, shouldn't be understood on its own terms as law, right? It is a performance. Anyways, I could use more detail there. But so what's cool about that, right, is like a lot of places where that was instituted by force, or like the idea of that was brought in by force, people didn't want to get rid of it. And so the whole thing that's nice about a set of laws is that it lets people live their lives. But the problem is like, what is the point that we're coming to in terms of like the reckoning that there is going to have to be, and the transformation that's going to take place in like allowing people to be alive. And then so like people have an idea of their sovereignty, right? Of like, oh, I don't, prices need to come down or something. And it's just like the world is not made of prices, right? Like the world is made of supply chains, logistics, conceptual frameworks that scaffold those things. And those things are transforming. And people might like to not think or whatever, but like it's very, very important to disrupt that tendency. But then that's where, we have to be meta-reflective, because as much as I want to be disrupting other people, the question is, am I self-disrupting? Or like, am I open to being influenced by other people as well? Or am I stuck? So it's sort of like physician heal thyself. It's like if I'm trying to get other people unstuck, if I'm stuck, anyway, it's not going to help. So anyways, against this, Wadley advances a phenomenology of drift after Ofra Glacier, the recognition that we no longer step in the same river twice. The drift condition invalidates stable reference. Human becomes a nostalgic brand rather than an ontological commitment. So I think it is important to say here about the nostalgia, like that for me, it's not that, transhumanism is a fait accompli. So, being human is old fashioned. It's really important to say like, oh no, the human never really obtained, like in the sense that you mean, right? Human has a significance, you could say, in Dhamma language. I might even say in Dhamma language, all terms sort of mean the same thing. Like anything you can articulate is sort of pointing at the same thing, which has something to do with the emptiness, the fullness, the sublimity, of everything. So like, for example, like a big issue with the concept of human is that it excludes, non-human animals, whereas like a truly integrated ethics or whatever, like it has to have implications for all sentient beings. So even trying to articulate an ethics through the particular category of human, like you are making a misstatement, because by only expressing the ethical position you're trying to say in terms of the human, like those aren't the right terms in which to articulate an ethical statement. So you're like being a bad model, right? Because you're not taking everybody into account, basically. But that's just one reason. It's also just basically in general that any concept that people might have to, like, humans are really is one where it's like people might have very different associations, but people, like, maybe everybody has associations. So that's in a way very bad or something, because like if you thought that either if everybody had the same associations or nobody had the associations, the term might be easier to wield anyway. What I'm trying to say is that, like, even the idea of nostalgia could convey the wrong idea, that it's like things are not what they once were. It's more so that things were not the way that we thought they were, and we're coming to appreciate that. At the same time, I want to say there's something very deeply traditionalist about everything that I'm trying to do, because I'm basically trying to say that the way to consecrate what has come before, basically our ancestors, our antecedents, which would include the things that we would put into such categories, the way to honor those things is to embrace their legacy, which is like our now current opportunity to allow something to emerge, which requires what will we say, destabilize, or recognizing the drift which is taking place. So basically, it's like the destiny of the nation, or quote, the idea of the nation was always to lead to this moment where it's like the fulfillment of the nation implies the destruction of the nation, because it's like this insistence on the inside outside logic and the insistence on like autonomy, but the paradox that there's other people who all have the same insistence, and that these mutual expectations lead to a logic not only of zero sum, but like kill or be killed, basically. Not to mention that logic then unleashes what you distrust dilemmas within. So it's like there's also a kill or be killed logic, which is unleashed within the nation. So this is the way that these sorts of binary oppositions are coming to really apply a whip of necessity. Like, we really need to be afraid of these like second order consequences of conflict, which gives us like a motivation to move on. But that requires basically really spreading the capability of thinking metacognitively, I guess. That's a tough thing, because I'm certainly very foolish, especially if you look at how I've lived my life. Anyway, but there's something about how like we are collectively very simple-minded, and we need to really like raise the floor on that, and really expand the pool of people who are designers. And the thing is that is, you could say that's dangerous, because it means that we're less predictable, we're less controlled. But that's exactly why it's important to foster this sort of intention that's related to universalism, Christian universalism, and then like putting universal in quotation marks, because the whole question of whether it's one thing is like, of course, a huge aspect of philosophy. But you basically have a positive sum thing where it's like everybody has some piece of the recipe, and like what we're trying to do is get to the position where we are able to bring our different parts of the puzzle to bear and overcome the conceit that we are fundamentally in opposition to each other. Anyways, so this crisis of meaning aligns with post-humanist and accelerationist trajectories. Rosie Bradati, Nick Land, Reza Negarestani, where subjectivity dissolves into networked systems. Wadley identifies a metaphysical continuity, the transformation of the human into a transitional operator within a total militarization of reality. Society is more militarized than politicized. Aligns, tough word. I don't really know much about any of these people, so that's something that it put in for me. But subjectivity dissolves into networked systems. I think what it's referencing there is that I'm sort of saying that it's not about the nation, it's about the social network. And then the social network is about the people. And then it's like the individual is not as simple and coherent as we might imagine it to be, even down to ourselves. So it's like things are disappearing into their constituent parts. And when things become mysterious, we try to investigate them but then like the different things that we would gather as evidence, like the parts, the things we would abstract over in order to try and gather definition of a thing, those things themselves are slipping into mystery. And then the total militarization. I mean, that's where I'm trying to get at the question of, what are the frog protesters missing? And it's like, just like standing there being like, oh, like I'm silly or whatever, like that's not enough, because the sort of military logic, which is being pushed through with these sorts of troop deployments and so on, that is something which is basically structurally part of our system. Like our system, or like, it's not even really a system, but like the situation that we're in, the planetary emergency, has so much to do with what's called the military, or the idea that people undertake kinetic operations, and then other people undertake kinetic operations in order to defend themselves, right? And we have these different, you call them centers of gravity or centers of technological development, which are themselves clusters, right? So when we say America and China, like each one of those things is a cluster of social networks, and then like these are interpenetrating, right? Which, so if you look at it from the perspective of one person knows several people who come from different organizations. They're in different spheres, different social networks, and so this is all very like threaded together and informal. But within that, militarization corresponds to basically the issue of distrust, or the Hobbesian trap, which is endemic not only to sort of what we call the military, but is endemic to all what we call social life. Where it's like there's the logic of bullying, or you call militarized, like weaponized conflict situations, pressure tactics, manipulation, deception. Like these are the sorts of things that become sites of obsession and intensity with respect to like private life. You see everybody talking about dating and cheating and family abuse and all of it. These are archetypal examples, right, of the Hobbesian trap, of distrust dilemmas, of the way in which like people's personal mythologies intersect with other people. The same way like I could make I made an AI image of Grimes, right? And so maybe Grimes doesn't like that. And so that's like me in a way using Grimes's image against them. In a similar way, like that happens interpersonally, right? Where like people set up the image of each other, and we, interact with each other by conceptually talking about that. Anyways, so the point is, I think that a big aspect of what you could call simple-mindedness, or people not thinking hard enough, is that like we have this delusion, right, of civilian life. Like that is a delusion. Like the delusion is that there's a part of like, if there's a battle anywhere, like it has implications everywhere. And a big aspect of manipulation is like trying to dissimulate that, or to try to get people to be naive, or to not. It's a funny thing, because you could make people be cynical, but they're cynical about the wrong thing. It's like, oh, I'm so worried about, being manipulated in this way, but that me being worried about that and vigilant about that and defending myself actually makes me easier to manipulate in a different way, which is similar. Yeah, like I don't want to be manipulated by woke. I don't want to be manipulated. I don't want my children, right, to become transgender. But so now I'm going to go listen to, the person from the church or whatever. So now like somebody can use religion, and now I'm giving them money, right? And that's like, it's the whole thing where it's like you're afraid of one thing, and then you go to some other people, but then they're sort of grifting, and before you know it, like, like you're compromised. I want to say it's like you're trying to avoid ops, but you can't. And so that's a way in which everybody's life is sort of militarized. We are all within this cognitive. It's again, it says, I think it says battle space. I forget if that was in the previous one of the previous ones. But again, battle space, it's very important to me that like, no, it's not on the forced order basis. It's not war. But so it's like, instead of the battle space, you could call it like the game arena, right? The video drome. I guess drome implies like battle. But also, again, we continue to have to work through this because of the Blitzkrieg reference. Anyways, the emergence of this condition suggests not nihilism, but the need for new metalogical operators, concepts capable of functioning across reflexive layers. The transnormal names this new plane of thought, beyond normativity, beyond classical dualism, toward an epistemology of recursion. So this is all very like boring language. I feel like this is very cliche heavy, like for our time. But at least I think it's interesting to apply this language and deploy it. Again, I should like emphasize like we need to be looking at this, the concept of the nation, and even the concept of military and war itself. That's really like where I get into it, about not just like looking at war as an emergency operation, but also looking at it theologically, in the sense of like, if there is a cosmological principle that you could say orders everything, or, you know, influences everything, then how could there be war? Because even things that are seemingly opposed to each other are just different aspects. It's sort of like a play, and which directly ties into the concept of Leela, but it's like, just because people are enemies in a play doesn't mean that they are really enemies. Not even like there is a reality which is different than the play, but also just that the play as an overall work of creation requires that opposition. Even if it's like Gladiators, where one of them really does die, there is basically an artistic complicity within that. I guess most of the time people are like coerced into doing that. Anyways, oh, maybe another thing to say about Blitzkrieg is that, like, taking on this warframe, it's sort of like, yeah, you're trying to take initiative and maybe provocative action to make certain perceptions of norms untenable. So you're trying to create not just new writing, but also new action. You're trying to be like a case study. And so in that, you're combining theory and practice. What am I trying to say here? And you're sort of like destituting. Is that the word? Destituent? Destituting? Like a concept or something. And so the Blitzkrieg is sort of like is talking about how like there is a lightning aspect to this. Maybe helpfully it ties into the fact that, you know, computers and so forth, the internet is electronic. So like I'm coming to you over lightning right now, Blitz. But it also is talking about the pace of change. And so as change happens faster and faster, like sacred cows are going to be killed. That might be a way to put it, is that like sacred cows are going to be killed, and basically it can happen the easy way or the hard way. And that's basically to say in neutral terms that very great transformation is coming. And so there's the question of basically, can you accept it? And also like, either can you not necessarily engineer trust, or like or like deal with the distrust dilemmas while seeing them as valid, right? As opposed to just saying like, oh, well, of course, you know, we can trust the free world, as opposed to setting up, you know, something where people are supposed to implicitly trust X or whatever. It's like, no, like general distrust makes sense. And so we have to operate sort of from that basis, from ground zero. Yeah, and finding a way to do that sort of is the game. Anyways, more supplementary references. So we have Antichrist as self-applied negative dialectic. I guess this is going well. So thesis, the Antichrist figure must be inverted. Instead of projecting apocalyptic blame outward, the mature gesture is to self-apply the label, acknowledging complicity in systemic violence and embracing theoretical negativity as the site of transformation. So yeah, that's basically to say like whatever's apocalyptic and threatening is not just outside, but it's also within. And so but that's also not just to say like this is a potential we have to be afraid of, we have to contain the apocalyptic, but it's like, no, we have to express the apocalyptic. In a way, we are here to end the world. Like what we consider normal and mundane and so forth is coming to an end. And so in a way, like what is proper for us to do is to carry that out, but properly, right? So that's then the whole question, is the curation of like, what does it mean? Because as much as we are destituting what is outside, like we are also being destituted. This is again in the idea of self-disruption, according to Ofer Gracier, where it's like 3/4 of the change is happening inside. But it's another place where it's like, you know, that really needs to be self-applied, right? Like I would want to see the systemic design inquiry to do with, you know, Jewish theology or Holocaust theology, or now we could have Gaza theology, right? And how, and like the discussion of yeah, I don't know if you'd say, yeah, self-transformation. I guess like, I guess in particular for Israel, it's a very interesting question in terms of like the national mission, because the national mission in a way has everything to do with Jewish eschatology. So basically, it gets you to a place where you really need to interpret, right, the Jewish eschatology to understand, well, what is the role that we are playing? And it gets into questions I was raising before, because even as you might see yourself as the main character, like part of what you're there to do is to set an example or allow for flourishing for other people as well. So like, how are other people being incorporated into your story as you are reaching the sort of messianic climax, right, of your story, or like, anyway, a messianic climax. Interesting then to connect that also to, for example, German nationalism, because German nationalism is now so defined by, thinking that you moved on from Nazism and like trying to reform from that. And now you're seeing, yeah, I guess you could say like with AFD, a lot of people see it as being more Nazi-like now, but I also like to go back to the Red Army faction, who were talking about how West Germany itself was like fascist or something. But so the thing is, like, we would like to think that we are good people because we are associated with people who defeated Nazism and we're not Nazis and so forth. But Nazism is again this issue where it's like, it's not a topic that can just be put outside. Like, we have to understand the I guess you could say it's like the apocalyptic character of Nazism, and also understand that we have an apocalyptic character as well. So it's not to say that everybody is a Nazi, but it's like, one way to say it would be like, we all abstract over the same emotions, like the intense rage or guilt or fear, the compulsion to destroy. Like, we all destroy other things. We eat, right? We inflict death in order to live. And, there's very different ways to do this and all. But especially in the age of AI, like, all of this it's very much becoming a very pressing question, right? Because it's not just something you can take for granted, as though we live in like this bountiful environment, which is able to just absorb these different interpretations or ways of doing things. Now everything is like, the implications of everything are much more pronounced, and the delicacy of its hanging together is more obvious. And so like the synergies, or like the interplay, has to be much more thoroughly considered, I would say. But so yeah, this ties into what I was saying before in terms of like the blitzkrieg, because like, if you're saying sort of like, well, I'm the Antichrist, for me, it is related to the idea that the Antichrist is the second coming as well, because again, it's very related to theodicy. And so the way in which, the divine or whatever is articulating its purposes through the negative, in the sense of like, oh, this is here as a threat or something, is there to be overcome, right? And so it's playing a very important role, in the same way that like, you can only rise to an occasion if there's an occasion to rise to, right? And that's the situation that we're in. Yeah. So in terms of embracing the idea of Antichrist, it's very similar. I mean, Jesus and Antichrist are very similarly portrayed, I would think, because Jesus comes with a flaming sword, right? And it's like being destructive, and in a way being cruel, right? Even like not having seeming not to have mercy. But I think that's basically a place to square the circle, because it's sort of like, you're just being like, yeah, I'm sorry, like, sorry to bother you, but, right, like, the world, like, your concepts are not adequate, right? And here I come to like take action, which is going to, I could say, like, break your brain. I mean, not even really trying to like get you to think something in particular, but really disrupt, not just like get you to think different content, but get you to think at a higher logical type, get you to like reflect on things more, and yeah, not leave you alone, right? And sorry, like, you're not going to be left alone. You do not have the right to a private life, right? Because everything that we do has implications for everybody else, which is also to say, you live by the sword, you die by the sword, right? So to go into these sorts of operations is, of course, already to understand that the personal stakes are infinite, right? I mean, whatever you do, like, if you could attract attention, you could be tortured, raped, killed, arrested, whatever. It's like, yeah, like, that can happen to you. Maybe that's also something, obviously, we don't want to happen. It's sort of like taking on the figure of the pariah, but for me, it's sort of like getting in between somebody and the person who's being bullied. It's a really weird thing, but there's basically a way in which people can scapegoat Nazism, right? So it's like sticking up for Adolf Hitler, not because killing anybody is justified or even like scapegoating anybody, but like in a weird way, like Nazis obviously like scapegoated Jewish people and all sorts of people, but then like we can focus so much negativity on that, like that again, we're not appreciating, our own apocalyptic character. Basically, the idea of like if you were living in Nazi Germany and you were, a German or you were a white guy in Nazi Germany, right? Maybe you would have been sucked up into it, right? And so like just to say like, oh, those people are so bad. It's like, I mean, in a theological sense, I would say I don't know if you could say it's blasphemy, but it's like you're criticizing creation. It's like that happened. Anyways, but so yeah, in that sense, it's in a way like you're sticking up for everybody's shadow. Like in the same way, like if somebody feels like they are like people are constantly mean to them, say they're right, but then they get drunk, and they scream at everybody, like, and it's people think it's rude or something. Like in terms of like repping the Antichrist, it's like, oh, like I can see that person like did something wrong, but like I will stand in the way and say that you can't just condemn them for that. And so, yeah, that's tough. It's sort of like being the devil's advocate or sympathy for the devil kind of thing. But it's powerful in terms of apocatastasis because it has something to do with the fact that everybody has that, right? So everybody has the apocalypse. You could say everybody sins, right? But we are all party to, this sort of shameful conduct, I guess. And so, like, in terms of broadcasting one's own perspective or intention toward all other sentient beings, it's powerful to take that into account. And so not to just be like, oh yeah, I am on the side of the good people. And then so people who want to think that they're good, think that you're on their side. But there's also an implicit blackmail where it's like you have to pretend to be good now because we're all aligned in this way. So it's sort of like, oh, we're all going to be MAGA together, but like maybe you look at transgender pornography but don't talk about that or something because officially we don't do that. Well, that's just one example. People might not think that is a good example or something, but I'm really trying to say like what is it? I don't even know. Anyway, we'll just keep going. Exposition. The post introduces multiple actors invoking Antichrist discourse. Peter Thiel, the Mormon shooter, Chaos, and the author himself. The shooter was not Mormon, by the way. They shot up a Mormon church, and they called the Mormons the Antichrist. I don't know if Grimes has referred to the Antichrist, but whatever. Each is analyzed as staging a performance that externalizes evil, scapegoating others to preserve moral coherence. Wadley calls this the most top-shelf concept, the final refuge of projection. That's not really what I meant by that. So what I meant was like of the different things I was looking at, like of the terms people crystallize it into, like, oh, you're being a fascist, you are the Antichrist, you are, the subverting, right? All these sort of like topics. I think the Antichrist is in a way very top shelf because it involves cosmology. So like if Buddhism or whatever, if there was a different religion or something that was the dominant religion of the most powerful country or something, then like that would also have very high value. I guess with China, you could say Marxism or Confucianism or something. But if like some Buddhist power was the most powerful, then we could be talking about Maitreya, right? Is Maitreya coming back, and who's representing, this eschatological prophecy, and also because the figure of the Antichrist, it is open to much more negativity. It's like, how much are you bearing witness to? Because if you're just sitting there talking about like climate change or human rights or something, it's in a way a very sanitized discourse. Religious Christian language like the Antichrist is also like that in a way, but it's like you would be open to seeing, right, the sexual perversion, right, or the the slaughter, right, the depth of sin, right? You have a sort of appreciation, and the Antichrist is really the whole point is that this figure is endowed, right, with the symbolic charge of everything bad that has ever happened, right? They're sort of like the embodiment of evil itself. And we try to, in other discourses, as the fascist or whatever, this also happens. I guess I would say that something like fascist, it's like it still requires certain conceptual coordinates to be intelligible, whereas sort of religious philosophy is already couched in the language of metaphysics and cosmology. So it's almost like no matter what is happening, you can channel the intensity of the moment into that language. But I'm not saying that, the only important language is phrased in terms of the Antichrist or something. I do think it is very interesting then to do comparative religion. And so not just to be talking about Antichrist, but second coming, the different ology, hypostasis. But then other ones, like I was saying, Mahdi, Maitreya, I forget who's supposed to come back in Zoroastrianism. And just like getting into comparative eschatology and being open to the idea that, what if they're all coming true at the same time? What if they were all talking about the same thing? How are we translating these things into each other and mutating them? And how could we see it actually as the fulfillment, right? It's the fulfillment of Christianity, that it has to be much more in conversation with everything else. Because again, if you're so special, right? Jesus is so special, right? Because it has implications for all sentient beings. And so it's like you really got to take the message. But it's similar, right, for Buddhism. And so like if both of these things are claiming to say something about all sentient beings, like to be able to treat of these other things as part of your own story, but also within your own story, like there has to be a reason why these other stories are there. So like if I'm going to sit here and be a Christian or whatever, and it's like, oh, well, God created this story or whatever. It's like, okay, well, why did God put Buddhism in the story, or whatever, or Islam or yeah. So it's like everything is a found object. It must be poeticized. It needs to be brought into total exchange, basically, which is going to be mutually transformative for what we're doing and for what other people are doing. And I think the crucial issue is many people see this, right, as subversion or something. But what there really is to try and hammer home is that in terms of being venerative, in terms of really upholding our obligation to the past, to our ancestors, to tradition or whatever, is to be open to the fact that these things were always leading us to a time of transformation, which means something about, right, going into these stories, like they're all projecting a time of big upheaval, and that's the kind of time that we're in right now. But then precisely not to try and interpret the various stories in ways where, oh, these are the bad guys and so on and so forth, but more like, the Antichrist is our self-ignorance, right? The Antichrist is the potential that we will channel an inadequate quality of intention into the use of technology, which will rebound and have bad aspects for ourselves, right? The Antichrist is over-relying on the idea of an external enemy. And in the meantime, our internal dynamics are becoming less trusting as well, because we're not, I don't know, we're not really expressing ourselves. We're stuck in, you could call it a hyper reality. It's not really right, but there's a very contrived, set of expectations and appearances. Anyway, yeah, the point of all this was just sort of like, it's interesting to take on this idea of the Antichrist, not to say that somebody else is the Antichrist, but to take on that energy and to be willing to, I guess, even like as a godly person, even as a good person, it's like you're going to bat for the Antichrist. Like, don't just blame it on the Antichrist. And also basically be open to a sort of diffuse Antichrist in addition to sort of a diffuse second coming. So it's sort of like the second coming of Jesus is sort of happening through all of us, but so is the Antichrist, right? So it's like this apocalypse, the fight between Jesus and the Antichrist is happening in our heart, right? And so it's not just about resisting a different person, but yeah, about curating, this tumult which is happening inside of ourselves. And so Antichrist, basically, like, it's not just about religious discourse, but discourse which is more open to dealing with messiness. So like something like human rights and democracy, it feels like church language to me. It doesn't feel like you're in the muck, right? In the mud of the battlefield, or like the shit and the blood, like in the maternity ward, right? Or the yeah, you know, the bile and the pus, you know, and the surgery, right? And you know, the feelings of a person who's sitting there like with a gun in their hand, contemplating whether they're going to kill themselves or not. You know, like these are the sorts of things that are very urgent to grapple with. And I feel like, yeah, having a discourse where it's like, oh, here we are, I'm here for my rights. You know, it's like really trying to portray oneself in this way where you're legitimate because you're conforming to norms. And I'm basically saying that is not, yeah, not tenable anymore, I guess, at least at the level of the norms that people are articulating. Anyways, to transcend it requires reflexivity, to be the Antichrist as an act of self-disruption. This gestures Nietzsche's Antichrist, Bataille's inner experience, and Baudrillard's apocalypse within. It is not theatrical blasphemy, but the assumption of metaphysical responsibility, the recognition that apocalyptic destruction is not coming from without, but radiates from within the symbolic system itself. And you don't even have to call it a symbolic system. It's sort of it's within whatever we are, right? It is what it is, right? Even beyond terms, it is. You know, that's where we come up with these ultimate words, right? It's emergence. It's becoming. It is whatever. Okay, this self-application transforms Antichrist from eschatological boogeyman into dialectical operator. The inversion recalls Hegel's negation of negation. Only by internalizing the principle of opposition can one transcend it. The Antichrist becomes a name for the total self-destruction necessary for resynthesis, a psychosymbolic ruin value derivation, to borrow Wadley's title. So yeah, ruin value is actually a term from Nazism, Albert Speer, you know, the idea of imbuing something with value after it's gone. So my association when I'm thinking about that is that you're creating a piece of art, which is then going to be somebody else's found material. So it's sort of like, you know, you are taking a picture that's in a magazine, and then I'm coming along and I'm making a collage or a mixed media collage. And one of my elements is this page from the magazine. So now the picture that you made is just part of my art. So I could say that, you know, this is part of the ruin value of what you made, right? Because I cut out other parts of it. So like the part that I'm displaying is just what is left, right? And it could even be changed, right? Like if I incorporate a sample, I could apply audio editing so it sounds different. It's not what you made, but it's iterating on it. So like what you made is I ruined it, right? In the sense that I converted it into ruins, and then I incorporated those ruins into my curation and articulation, and thereby like converted them into, again, found materials, your found footage, you know, for the horror term. And Baudrillard refers to this as cannibalization. So yeah. And then anyway, and so I think it's very interesting that this sort of aesthetic idea of ruin value, it was not created by the Nazis. It was sort of like a romantic thing. But like this whole idea of ruin value is very associated with the Nazis, which I think is very interesting. I guess in a self-reflexive way, you know, and it gets into what we're talking about here, right? It's like, what is the ruin value of Nazism, or the ruin value of the Antichrist? So, or the Antichrist as the idea of a person who's going to come and be very evil. Like if we let that idea of it go, then what is the ruin value? Like what is that? What can that story still do for us? It's obviously something which is still captivating a lot of people, but maybe in a pre-ruined way. Like, so in a way, for a lot of people's favorite concepts, they're sacred cows. You still need to ruin them, right? In the sense of you're sacrificing the sacred cow. You are ruining it, right? You are not allowing the symbolic operation of, you know, what they would prefer. And that is basically the negativity. That is the aggression. But I would basically argue that the most elegant and effective way to do that does not involve kinetic force. So it is a way of like your derivation, you're devastating people, but you devastating like a movie that hits you in the guts, right? That's the like level at which you're trying to operate, as opposed to, you know, kinetic force. But then even within the non-kinetic, right, there's different elements, right? Like I can browbeat you with a concept. I can use name calling, right? Terminating thought cliches. So many things are basically more or less elegant, and they're less elegant because they're not opening to you. They're not. In a way, everything possible is a prompt for self-disruption. Anything you could possibly do is a prompt for self-disruption, and that has a lot to do with apokatastasis and just the whole idea of how bad serves the good or whatever. But it is constantly inviting or challenging you to respond not at the same logical type. So it's like if you ask a question, it's like why are you so stupid, right? Like the part of the challenge of that is that you're not supposed to just answer like, well, here's why I'm stupid. Like if you sit there and take it seriously and you answer why you're stupid, maybe you are losing the exchange. But still, if somebody is like, why are you hitting yourself? Why are you stupid? It's like it's continually a challenge for you to overcome. Don't reply in kind, but do something else. And what that is, right, is a big question. But it's also like Before the Law from Franz Kafka, where it's like somebody tells you don't come in, but like you really could go in. I forget how that transitioned, but we'll keep going. In this reading, the act of identifying with Antichrist corresponds to what Baudrillard called the rejuvenation of negativity. By embracing the negative, thought becomes violent again, capable of cutting through saturation. This is put in pretty simplistic terms. Even just the idea of identifying, like it's more so that like reading the concept of Antichrist against itself is a way of setting identity itself into question. As Baudrillard says, identity is untenable. It is its own death, in part because it fails to inscribe its own death. So failing to inscribe your own death is basically acting like you have a cognitive frame which is going to last forever and which isn't going to like transition into something else. So the whole point of the Antichrist is it's an eschatological figure, which is, changing our perception of the purpose of everything. So identifying as the Antichrist is sort of a misnomer because the whole point of this dynamic, which goes beyond the Antichrist, mind you, I would say, behind the Antichrist, right, there's experimental unit, right? There's the deeper ARG, which is like driving us into this grappling. Anyways, so thought becomes violent again. So yeah, the violence is like, to really be trying to change up how people are thinking when it comes to what we consider to be very sacred and like, what is it, like guardrails type of concepts. You could call them like the catechons. You are removing the catechons because it's like, oh, well, we have the idea of the law because if we don't, chaos will ensue. But it's like, but now, the pretense of the law is itself leading to chaos. So we have to remove the pretense of law, at least the way it is right now. But we still face the danger, like, well, yes, there is, what that is accounting for. You are removing something which is holding something dangerous back, but it's like you have to come up with a new way of dealing with it. And so the failure of the dams that we've built so far is just like the cruel necessity, the whip of necessity, which is driving us into this new and desperate act of like bricolage, which is crucially like not even just trying to build something new to hold something back, but I don't know, building channels. So we have here some more supplementary references. All right, toward a spiritual democracy of action. Thesis: the only legitimate democracy is ontological, not institutional. The universal participation of beings in creation through their acts. Institutional democracy based on representation, protection, and proceduralism is an exhausted simulation. What remains is the spiritual democracy of choice as world-altering gesture. So even like this articulation that is being put forth right now is limited because it's still, you can question whether people make choices. You can question whether there are separate people. But at least I think this articulation is progressive because it's basically saying that you're emphasizing the degree of freedom that's always there, regardless of, the institutional thing. Because when it becomes about like, oh, we need to protect our democracy, it's like you're protecting something in a picture frame. And then it's like, well, if we let them ruin the picture, it's going to ruin democracy or whatever. But it's like, no, like what we're thinking about in terms of like good social relations or whatever, like that is something which is always present. It's not just in some faraway thing. So yeah, it empowers us. It gets us to think about, what is our sovereignty? What are the norms basically that we are implying, and how are we modeling, flexibility, and where we meet resistance or whatever, how do we engage in a way which is democratic, in the sense of like we do have respect for other people. We're not just trying to control them or disrupt them. We want them to self-disrupt, but at the same time, we might understand that we are in an emergency situation where we have to induce that somehow. So it's sort of like, you're out in the cold, somebody has hypothermia, they want to fall asleep and die, and you can't carry them. So it's like you have to get this person to want to, in a way, walk, right? Because you can't just carry them. You can't disrupt. You can't change their location by yourself. You have to change something in them to get them to want to walk. So this actually gets back into upaya by Buddhism, because it's sort of like, what's motivating you? Like, do you stand there and just be like, well, you're going to die. You're going to die. Maybe that's not the right thing. Maybe you start talking about the hot cocoa that you can have, or you can tell them that, you'll do them a favor if you get back, or you can tell them you love them, or you can tell them the dog misses them, whatever it is that might get through to them where it like clicks, right? And that's the difference between, dominating somebody and trying to induce self-disruption or something. And so where we are doing our own self-disruption, like say I'm given to berating somebody, right? I normally go, oh, you're so stupid, blah, 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 like do it. And then I bully people and put pressure on them until they do what I want. But in this circumstance where, you are having hypothermia, right? And I need to self-disrupt you. I can't just boss you around because like your cognitive faculties are not there. So I have to self-disrupt. It's like if I'm looking at the situation like it's a nail because I'm a hammer, and it's like I just want to bully you, maybe you're going to die, and that's not what I want in the situation. So I then have to self-disrupt, and I can sit there and have a moment where I go, oh, like this is not working. Why do I always think about going in this way? And then like, what else can I try? And then you try, something else, like, oh, well, we can listen to your album, whatever. And you do something that gets them to self-disrupt. So it's like that is a problem situation where your initial approach isn't working, and then you have to self-disrupt. You have to change. You have to have a meta reflection on what you're doing and transcend and try something else, which is then going to induce self-disruption and getting somebody else to be involved in working toward a better situation. Okay. In his closing argument, Wadley distinguishes between institutional democracy, which enforces obedience to inherited concepts, and a real democracy grounded in agency as cosmological participation. The latter draws from both Stoic and idealist traditions, Epictetus on inner freedom, Hegel on the self-determining spirit, and aligns with Baudrillard's democracy of gaming, where each move constitutes a symbolic event that reshapes the total configuration. It's interesting because Baudrillard talks a lot about games in terms of rules, and I guess rules in terms of, as opposed to laws. Baudrillard liked rules better. And I guess what to say here, institutional democracy enforcing obedience to inherited concepts. I mean, they're related in the sense that, institutional democracy has everything to do with representation. You can talk about representative democracy. And so it's like you are relying on somebody else to be your agent. And so the question is, what responsibilities does that leave you with, right? What is your civic responsibility? And also, like, what is your civic sovereignty? Where are you allowed to intervene yourself? So yeah, in terms of obedience to inherited concepts, I would just say, like, when people talk about saving democracy, especially if you look at the institutions we have now, people who talk about saving democracy, they're usually like, we need to reverse Citizens United and we need to do all this, where it's like, it's not going to work through our own legal machinery. Like, our own legal machinery is not going to institute things that these people would want. So it just seems like delusional, I guess. And so what I'm saying is basically you want to operate trans-institutionally. What you're ultimately doing is an influence operation, and you're expanding an alternative reality game, which is a design inquiry, which is basically going to get people to self-disrupt in a way which will break them out of these institutional holding patterns in different ways. But instead of just saying, like democracy is a sham, like this is a place where I'm trying to wield democracy. I'm trying to have my own semblance of it. And it gets to what I was saying in terms of like, is this a norm or not? Because what I'm saying is everybody gets a vote. We don't just vote with our feet, we vote with everything we do. And I've called this the pantheist theory because if everybody partakes of the divine, right? If Atman is in Brahman, then we are all the voice of God, right? Declaring our thing. But the thing is, like me adopting that sovereignty or authority or something, that does not stop you from doing the same thing. So we all have our say, but we ultimately cannot control, any other actors that might be out there. But I think that is what to say. It's a more coherent, or for me, it's a symbolically more powerful way of talking about this issue of democracy, not to be like trying to uphold, some order or some idealized order from what came before, but, continually putting the ball in everybody's court and also claiming for oneself the authority to like act, especially in emergency situations, the way one sees fit. But that also requires like articulating what the emergency situation is and why the actions of other people are not adequate, why one feels the need to strike out on one's own. Anyway, running out of breath here, so we got to keep going. In this frame, freedom is not a right, but an ontological constant, the capacity of each actor to instantiate reality through action. To protect democracy through normative control is to misunderstand it. Democracy cannot be secured, only enacted. This is pretty cool because it gets past this sort of like security framework. Because, it's really not even just about we need to stop other people from killing us. It also involves avoiding the final solution along the lines of like a totally rigid thought control, because that is, an unfortunate negative outcome that could happen. So the thing is, like, you're trying to, even within whatever internal thing, it's like you're trying to fight all your enemies so that you can cultivate a space of internal freedom or variation. Because even if you you want to have some homogeneity, right, among the people of your tribe or something, let's say, but you still don't want to, it's not even just that you don't want to be the same as other people, you don't want to literally be the same person. So everybody wants pluralism. It's just within what bounds, right? But so that requires having an openness to freedom and sort of you could call it self-determination, like of each person. But the problem is that like this is actually very infinitely fraught because like our social relations are actually characterized by like deep levels of deception and manipulation, in addition to sort of self-deception and so forth. So it's actually quite difficult to do. Like we act like, oh, people are coming, things are being corrupted, but it's like, again, that sort of corruption, the apocalypse, that sort of stuff, it's also coming through us. Anyway, this position reinterprets performance art and theoretical violence as democratic acts in the metaphysical sense, affirmation of the world's recursive self-creation through free play. Wadley's appeal to artists, scientists, operators echoes Joseph Beuys' notion of social sculpture, everyone an artist shaping the social field through symbolic labor. Thus, the ruin value is not collapse, but sublime residue. From the ruins of exhausted political forms emerges an apocatastatic freedom that is neither governance nor chaos, but participatory cosmogenesis. Yeah, see, like, it's cool. Like, I wouldn't write that way, but I think it's fun to do this. So again, commenting on this form, like, I just sort of like, I feel really uptight about my own writing. So it's funny because I give you two things that are very imperfect. Like my writing is just very like rambly. What are you talking about? And then this is more bolted together, but also kind of simplistic language that I don't even really agree with. But so between the two, I'm doing something here, and we'll continue to iterate on this. There's still a little bit more too. But so about this part, we really like the social sculpture. Yeah, everybody's like co-creating this as art. And so the sort of like appeal to dogma is really trying to like limit other people's like artistic horizons so that they will build things that you also enjoy. Or just so that in general, like people's creations don't get out of joint I suppose. And so we need to get more tolerance for that to happen, which requires more bleeding together, more self-disruption, and also more ruin value in the sense, like, because the greatest thing, because when it comes to like art, like ruin, the ruin value thing, you don't actually have to destroy the art, right? If I take your picture and put it in my collage, like you can still have your picture, right? But so what it is it's sort of like you're generating fan fiction. Oh, sorry about the shower, by the way. But so it's like, the things that you're creating become found materials for other people to make art, and then they can use your art to make their own art, and you can use their art to make your art, and you don't even necessarily have to like each other's art, but there could be a way in which it could be okay. And this logic of like, oh, I think this is cool. Well, I think that's cool. And it's like, oh, well, they're related. And now like we're putting our stories together, right? We're playing our dolls together. And like to the extent that we think that that's not right, like we are, I don't know, we're being disrupted. So anywho, oh yeah, ruin value as sublime residue is also interesting because it's reminiscent of progressive revelation or perennial philosophy, which is reminding me of James Lindsay talk, like being paranoid that like things are oozing woke, but it's really just like, yeah, they're oozing apokatastasis, right? It's like everything is like there are cosmological principles or whatever, there's a magic which is running through everything, and in a way, like you can try and fight it. It reminds me of this part of Synecdoche, New York, where the daughter is like, I don't want blood. And the person is like, it's okay, honey, like you don't have blood. And it's like, you can't just tell her that they don't have blood. But so it's basically like, the perennial, like everything ultimately is, the face of God, like shining through to itself and so on. And so that is in a way dismaying because it is the obliteration in some sense of like distinctions that we would like to hold things together, like this is good and this is bad. And it's like the more things come together, it's like, oh, you really understand like the interplay between those things and why they couldn't be what they were without each other, and where they were both going, like they're both constituent elements of something else, which that's the sort of understanding. So like we're really, in addition to like being a strategic operational design inquiry on a mass scale or whatever, it's also sort of like giving people shrooms, like giving people like this changing appreciation of things, and also like cultivating the intention to like not simply be taking advantage of them. Like there's always all sorts of ways to like do what I'm talking about with not a good quality of intention, or like trying to hook up, the ineffable and all this, but you really just want to make money, or you really just want to get in the bunker, or you really just want to, achieve something in particular. But like, it's really not the way to do it. But in terms of like, again, going back to spiritual democracy or whatever, it's like everybody gets to play the game as they see fit. And so again, getting into the self-disruption, it's like we can't force each other to play nice. It's not even really about playing nice. But yeah, it gets into this realm of like co-designing with the enemy, which Archipelago of Design has referenced. And we'll leave it here. Synthesis: ruin value, derivation as metaphysical design doctrine. Across these 5 theses, Jauntology Jouse presents an evolving metaphysics of symbolic warfare. AI media inaugurate a new plane of theoretical violence and self-alienation. Performance events function as iterative symbolic weapons within attention economies. Classical humanist concepts collapse under the pressure of transformation. Negativity, Antichrist logic, becomes the site of transcendence through reflexive inversion. Spiritual democracy redefines freedom as participation in cosmogenesis. So again, the weapons logic, don't like it. It's tense because theoretical violence I do endorse. And so that's where just we have to think more broadly about violence, basically. Like think about a violent gesture. Like this is me moving violently, but I'm not like doing kinetic violence to anybody. It's very important to be able to understand that violence does not mean like just kinetic force. But then weapon, I feel like, is a term where it's like it is overdetermined. Like if I'm affirming that something is a weapon, then that means basically I'm fighting somebody else. Like it sounds like you use weapons on enemies or something. So I wouldn't really talk about weapon. And I guess that's where I would need to come up with something else. It's like emergency response gear, right? You're not like a fire hose is not a weapon, or like an axe that you're using to cut open a car or whatever, a door. Like that's not a weapon, right? It's an implement. And so, especially a performance event, the crossover between activism and terrorism and state activity and clandestine special operations and so forth, all of that is bleeding together. That's understood. But that's not to just embrace it and be like, oh, well, yeah, this is a weapon. Like, I think in terms of walking that line where it's like we understand that kinetic operations are taking place and like we can't just sit here and like just condemn people who do that because we're part of that dance as well. Like we don't exist outside of that. But on the other hand, like we are wanting to influence the way the game is played, right, away from kinetic operations because we have the conviction, right, that you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So like I don't want to die in a nuclear war. I don't want to be killed by a totalitarian state or whatever. So if there is a totalitarian state or whatever, I don't want it to kill people, right? And I don't approve or whatever. Like I'm trying to constantly launch influence operations that can help obviate the seeming necessity of kinetic force as well as coercive non-kinetic force. Basically of things like anyways. So the text thereby articulates a doctrine of design through negativity, an invitation to embrace violence not as destruction, but as the generative logic of transformation. What Wadley calls Jauntology, the derive of conceptual play through ruin, recalls both Baudrillard's Fatal Strategy and Nietzsche's Amor Fati. Its derivation of ruin value mirrors Albert Speer's aesthetic principle of monumental decay, but reinterpreted symbolically. What persists is not the edifice, but the logic of its collapse. Yeah, so the whole thing about negativity, I don't think I really wrote anything about negativity. I guess in talking about the Antichrist, it is related. And like in a broad sense, yes, like in terms of evil, it's like it's all the things that are difficult to talk about. Ben Zweibelson was talking about it with O for Gracia in terms of forbidden topics, things that are taboo. So I do think in a way, like it's important to cultivate this aura of like, we are harrowing hell, right? Like we are going there. We are going to sort of like you're being a nun who goes to death row. It's like, we want to see the worst of the worst. Like we will be the brothel madam. Like we are going to comfort, somebody who's crying. Anyway. So there's something about that there, but I'm not that comfortable with the use of the term negativity here. And then this, I think this is kind of just word salad. What persists is the logic of its collapse. It is sort of like that. It's sort of like in general, like the divine is making a mess and then it's resolving it. So it's really sort of like, you set a musical chord and you hit the chord and then that is sort of what it is. But then there's the echoing, there's the sustain and there's the overtones and all of this. And so that's what you could call sort of the logic of its collapse, is like everything which is there other than what you'd consider the discrete event. And then like in terms of my overall treatment of ruin value, it's sort of like these ruins are collapsing into each other and that is becoming the new site. That is the place where we are all finding our materials now. Okay, so Jauntology Jouse thus extends the experimental unit's cosmology into the realm of post-conceptual strategy, the art of fighting symbolically within the collapse, producing new forms of meaning from the ruins of meaning itself. So again, yeah, this is all very, maybe like everything that I do is just very cliche. Like this sounds like kind of boring, but like it's very important to take this to, specific terms like democracy, nation, whatever, like, because I think people are constantly trying to like avoid nihilism or something. Like you want to like keep your classical concepts going because you're so afraid of like falling into indeterminacy or something. But precisely what I find demoralizing is this injunction to like be legible, to be normal or whatever. And I really do think it's killing us. So yeah, post-conceptual, you could say transconceptual. Instead of strategy, you could also say stylistics. And again, you could say not fighting, not the art of fighting symbolically, but mounting operational responses. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. It's been nice chatting with you, and I'll see you next time.